you have something to say, Toussaint?
Nope.
Okay, I thought I'd cut you off. Let's talk about that institutional structural racism. To me, it's interchangeable.
Yeah.
It seems like you said, it's a term doing a lot of heavy lifting. When someone uses that term around me, I usually try to follow up with, well, how does it function? Explain the mechanism. Usually the answer is white power, white supremacy. When you get thrown that term, which I'm sure you hear a lot in the work you do, institutional racism, how do you deal with that? How do you explain that with that kind of original sin framework as well? Like racism is the original sin of this country and all that other stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, what makes it tough is that it's just hard. People using it are using it and meaning different things, and it's hard to know each person when they say it, what do they mean? But I mean, I do think asking questions like you do is a good starting point. Like, what do they mean by it? Or I mean, I think just kind of trying to just pivot the conversation along those lines to something that is a structural, problem. So I mean, again, when it comes up to education, I always bring this part up about like the tax policy in our state and what that does to education. So and again, I think depending who you're talking to, I mean, it's also one of these things. I think it's very context specific. I mean, if you're organizing with someone in a campaign and they're a good person, but maybe they have some misleading ideas, I think sometimes you can just ignore stuff and pivot back to what you want to talk about. Because again, I do think a lot of people, they're using that term. They're trying to get onto something, the right path, of saying like, there's something structural going on here. Maybe I don't know how to articulate it. Some people they're more cynical when they use it. So yeah, but again, it's kind of hard term to deal with now because everyone uses it and it kind of means nothing now. But yeah, I think just trying to pivot to something that really is a good example of an institutional mechanism that plays out in a way that disproportionately affects Black people, but is not necessarily caused by a racial policy. Is kind of the way to go. And it's kind of like the thing, I know Adolf has said this a lot, talking about during the Bernie campaign, if people ask him about, well, what about race? And the way he kind of explains it, in terms of regular people, it actually mostly makes sense. So like, I think most regular Black people will kind of be, oh yeah, that does make sense. But when it comes to these, the political hacks or the media figures or academia figures who make their whole career off of this, that's when they can't allow it to make sense to them.
But what if my landlord calls me the N-word? Would that be institutional racism?
No. Be an unfortunate incident.
That happened to Toussaint the other day. She, the landlord was just walking up and down the hallway, and he was just, raising this nigger's rent. I'm gonna raise this nigger's rent.
I've never seen my landlord. My landlord is a corporation, so if my landlord calls me the N-word, is it not institutional racism?
I think that's institutional racism right there. If her corporate landlord
comes through a company email, which it probably will, then it is.
The nigger in 45B shall get a 20% rent increase.
But this actually brings up, another way of explaining this. Again, looking at these disparities that are real, and when I say they're not necessarily caused by a racial cause, it's like when we look at deindustrialization, where just as more Black workers are getting a foothold in manufacturing in cities, these jobs start to leave due to automation, due to offshoring, moving to the suburbs, all these sort of things. So looking at that, I have no doubt that the corporate elite in the 60s and 70s probably included a lot of individuals who were racist. I don't really have a doubt about that. But we really have to think, was it a matter of they got in a room and said, how do we fuck over Black people? Let's do this. Let's automate. No, I mean, they were acting out of they're doing what a capitalist does, and they were acting on these economic imperatives. And it shows up in many ways. And one of these ways is, it hurt Black people disproportionately, but it also hurt a whole lot of white people, as we saw and we're seeing today.
But they're not. I feel like they're at a table, though, Paul. There's a table, one of those big oval tables. There's a bunch of white people. It's dark in the room, and they're trying to figure out ways. They're like this.
Yeah.
What if we automate in the inner cities?
They're vaguely German.
I could be wrong. Maybe there'll come like a hidden camera footage will come out, and it's like, holy
like
shit,
a puffy video. It's just a puffy video of white people.
It's like, holy shit, that is how it happened. Damn.
White people in bathrobes planning things against Black people.
Right.
I see the niggas are smiling again.
They're holding their towels on while they're plotting against us.
You know, this is something Touré Reed has brought up a lot. You know, this whole thing around how agricultural workers left out of New Deal labor policy. So they, not included in the National Labor Relations Act. And many people take that as deliberate leaving out to exclude Black people. And it's like, well, it doesn't fully make sense when you account for the vast majority of agricultural workers at that time were white. So again, absolutely no doubt that the people who crafted that policy in the 30s probably had racist attitudes as individual and probably were not the biggest fans of Black people. But again, the fact that 80% of agricultural workers were whites kind of should make you think, was that really their primary motivation? Or was it, it kind of had to do with the agricultural industry at that time being able to lobby for clearly their economic interests of not wanting them to unionize, not having to pay into Social Security. So I think that's the way we should.
But did their heart break? Would their heart break when they knew they were hurting white people?
Apparently not enough.
White people will be hurt. Oh no. Never that. No Social Security, you say? Oh. I weep.